Welcome back to the Gaming Co-op. Today I want to do a quick battle report before the lockdown happened, and so I was fortunate enough to get a 1500 point game in against some Carcharodons. We rolled off in the GT pack and we got Vital Intelligence, which is the old style hammer and anvil deployment with 6 objectives, 2 in the deployment zones and 4 in no man's land. So onto the Carcharodon list, we had Vanguard Vets, Assault Marines, and a bunch of Tactical Marines, in addition to 2 Death Dreads, an amazing flyer that you'll see a photo of, and a bunch of characters, including a Tech Marine and a Company Commander. The Carcharodons also had psychic support from a librarian, so here's that amazing Hammerhead flyer. The Carcharodons were being run as a successor chapter to Raven Guard. All the shark symbology and teeth are all freehand, which is amazing. So on to the Carcharodon deployment, which will look like this. You will notice that both armies deployed quite defensively. This is becoming more and more the norm in 9th edition. So if you're learning anything going from 8th to 9th, take advantage of deploying defensively behind pieces of terrain and then moving up like my opponent does here. So as you can see, very similar with the Orks. Everything's deployed out of line of sight or really far back, except for my bikers, and you'll see what happens to them for that. There are some units that weren't able to get a good hidden position, and that's these shock jump dragsters. The bases on buggies are so big they had to be deployed really far back, but for units such as a shock jump dragster that has really good movement, they don't have to worry as much about repositioning in the later turns. And by being so far away and out of the picture, they actually are very safe because a lot of units don't have the movement or the range to actually threaten them turn 1. After deployment, we rolled off and the Carcharodons were going first, so they deployed scramblers in their deployment zone and then immediately deleted the bikers. But this allowed the rest of my army to move up through that funnel point and get onto some objectives. So after turn 1 of Orks retaliating and moving up, we had secured 3 objectives, and the Grots had decided to begin data intercept in my deployment zone. The Weird Boy casted Maniacal Seizures on the flyer, which allowed the rest of my army to focus it down. The Deathskull reroll of 1 hit, 1 wound and Daka really helped to bring down that flyer on the first turn. And Maniacal Seizures is just so important when you need to focus down 1 unit. That extra AP, it is disgusting. And so using the mobility of the buggies, we just moved up and started zoning out sections of the board and capturing objectives, playing very aggressively, which is a nice refreshing change from my guard. So the shock jump dragsters, one didn't do too much this turn, but the other one was an absolute star. He deep struck into the backfield here. He just had enough room from the characters to actually snipe the Tech Marine, who was his warlord, who I knew would be a problem if he was able to continuously heal 3 wounds onto the Death Dreads throughout the game. So that worked out really well, and I ended up boxcarring him and just nuking him turn 1. And because this shock jump dragster was the star racer in my game, I used the 1 CP strat there, temperamental whirligig, to redeploy him back into my deployment zone after he finished shooting. And so at the bottom of turn 1, this is what the opponent's deployment zone looked like. His Death Dreads have moved up to try and gain some better line of sight on some things and to capture that objective there. However, the Death Dread was just too slow. He wasn't able to get that objective there. In turn 2, with both the armies getting much closer to each other, some of the buggy units got to absolutely perform their jobs that they do oh so well, including this much slept on Boomdakis Nazwagon, who was reduced to 1 wound. He soaked up so much shots in this turn and was an absolute star. So you can see once again that the Tactical Marines started taking backfield objectives, allowing the Death Dreads to move up. Orks on the brain and snots in it. I actually mean dreadnoughts, not Death Dreads. And unfortunately, this is one of the only photos I really have of his dreadnoughts. They're absolutely gorgeous. He's got these mutant bits coming out of them, really showing their sharky aspects, teeth everywhere. So the Vanguard Vets moved up to the center of the table with the Warlord and held the center objective there, but they weren't able to score the primary. Once again, Marines coming around and taking objectives from Death Dreads, Dreadnoughts, allowing them to move up the board and start playing more aggressively. So this was a major turn 2, because my opponent actually didn't score anything for his primary. All his points in turn 2 came from secondaries, which included deploying scramblers in the middle of the field by the Vanguard Vets and one of the tactical Marine squads in the background doing the data intercept. So into turn 4, the Marines started pushing my backfield objectives. I had brought in my last squad of commandos to attempt to do data intercept, as only infantry units can do it, and my Weird Boy was too busy still casting powers. So here's what the table looked like. The Vanguard vets had been defeated in the top right corner after taking out 2 of the Mega Track scrap jets. There was much death and destruction there. But then the custom boosted blasters shot into them. The Gretchen fought them in close combat. One of them actually chewed off the leg of Vanguard vet, which is hilarious. Always remember that Gretchen are surprisingly dangerous in large numbers. It's literally in the codex. So our weird boys and psychers kind of met at the center of the table, looked at each other, cast and denied each other repeatedly. My guy ended up throwing down a smite, which helped clear out some of the Vanguard vets because mortal wounds are the best at dealing with anything with a storm shield. Definitely the change from a 3-up to a 4-up is huge. The shock jump dragsters just kept popping around the board, taking shots at key targets. And in the later turns after the dreadnoughts were down, they tried to eliminate this 2-man squad of tactical marines who kept doing data intercept. But the volume of shots just wasn't there to get rid of the squad, unfortunately. So in the later game, they ended up charging in, and that ended up just being a continuously grindy combat. They were slowly getting whittled down, but luckily buggies don't bracket, which is beautiful. So as you can see, the company commander there with the Teeth of Terra and the Emperor's Sword was kind of out by himself after I had gotten rid of the Vanguard vets. This Boomdaka Snazwagon had raced around the side of the board there to get me engaged on all fronts, and I really had started to push into my opponent's deployment zone. Meanwhile, in my deployment zone, these assault marines ended up interrupting my commandos while they were doing the data intercept, which was absolutely horrendous because in these later turns where I had a lot more control of the board, I really needed those points. But it's interesting, for mission secondaries, I think data intercept might be a trap. Me and my opponent, we got talking about it at the end of the game, and he only scored 4 points on it. I only scored 6, and both of us were constantly on objectives. It just didn't really do much. And personally, I feel that my original gut instinct of taking While We Stand We Fight on the buggies probably would have paid out better in the end. The company commander with the Teeth of Terra and Sword of the Emperor tried to clear out the Gretchen and the custom boosted blaster, but it didn't end up working out. The Gretchen lived. So here at the end of the game, you can see kind of what the table's starting to look like. I cleared off the back right objective, killed the last squad of tactical marines, and I was down to these final 2 who were fighting both my shock jump dragsters and my truck. They'd soaked up about 1 turn of shooting and 2 turns of close combat with the buzz saws on the buggies, and then I threw my truck in there thinking, hey, you know, just more attacks, try and whittle them down, but they just wouldn't die. So these 2 are definitely getting placed into dreadnoughts when they get back to the monastery. Prior to the truck engaging those 2 marines, the boys had disembarked and had tried to make it to that objective to do data intercept, but once again, me and my opponent discussed why we think it's a trap. So they end up doing deploy scramblers in no man's land. The Gretchen held the top objective and the Boomdaka Snazwagon cleared out the assault marines and took the objective back from them. And not to bag on data intercept too much more, but you really only have 3 turns to score it, so it's a really difficult one for armies to actually obtain unless, you know, you have a ton of bodies that can get on objectives and survive long enough till your next command phase. So by turn 5, the Orks were able to eliminate all the enemy models on the table. We ended up scoring 10 points for deploy scramblers, 6 for data intercept, and 11 for engage on all fronts, while my opponent scored 4 for data intercept, 10 for deploy scramblers, and 0 for While We Stand We Fight. The shock jump dragsters were definitely the stars of the game. This is the one here that first turn killed off the tech marine. They just were everywhere, constantly dishing out a ton of damage. So that's why I'm picking them for my MVP. For the Carcharodons, I believe it was the Vanguard vets because they did that huge trade on turn 3, getting rid of both the Megatrack scrap jets and threatening the Gretchen. The biggest thing though was definitely the dice rolling. The Carcharodons, their luck was absolutely dreadful this game. It sucks seeing that kind of stuff because no matter what you do tactically, sometimes the dice just don't want you to win. And in this case, it seemed like that. They were just not rolling hot at all. It doesn't help that I was rolling a ton of 6s by the end of the game. So that's it for our recap from the game. If you like what we're doing here on the channel, hit like and subscribe, follow along on all of our social media. So stay tuned for more content on the Gaming Co-op.